name is Salih Booker. I'm the Executive Director of the Center on Housing Rights and Evictions, an international housing rights NGO based here in Geneva, but with offices in Asia, in Africa, and Latin America. We do not have a physical program in the United States, but we're obviously very concerned about housing rights in the United States and the massive violations of housing rights that are occurring, as has just been referred to. The occasion of today's side event is the fact that the United States government is about to undergo its first universal periodic review here in Geneva. This is the first time that the United States government will submit itself to this new review process where every country in the world must be reviewed by the Human Rights Council to see what progress it is making toward the respect, protection, and realization of all international human rights. The United States today is also going to the polls. It's an election day in the United States, so many millions of Americans are exercising one of their civil and political rights, the right to vote. But human rights, all human rights, begin at home, but only if you have a home. The violations of housing rights in the United States prevent so many millions of Americans from enjoying their other civil and political rights and economic and social and cultural rights. The right to health, the right to education, and, as I said before, their basic rights to exercise their civil and political rights in an electoral democracy. The right to housing is one of the most important economic, social, and cultural rights, and it represents in many ways the unfinished business of human rights in the United States. The United States will come to Geneva. It will champion itself or present itself as a champion of human rights in the world. But the United States itself does not recognize a large part of the human rights that have been institutionalized, that have been detailed in legal documents and treaties and conventions by the international community since the 1950s. We must remember that the United States, as far back as 1944, was grappling with this very issue of whether or not it needed a second Bill of Rights, a Bill of Economic Rights. I would just quote the 32nd President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt, during his State of the Union address in 1994. He indicated that the political rights guaranteed by the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, had proved inadequate to ensure us equality in the pursuit of happiness. He proposed to create an economic Bill of Rights. And in that Bill of Rights that he articulated would be the right to adequate living, including a standard of living, including the right to adequate housing. So as the United States goes to the Universal Periodic Review, I hope that you, representatives of civil society, representatives of other states participating in this process, will review and challenge the United States record on its meeting the respect, the protection, and the realization, the progressive realization of economic rights and social rights, such as the right to adequate housing. The link between a secure home and basic values of human dignity, security, and democratic citizenship lie at the heart of the international human rights movement, and they have ensured a prominent position for the right to adequate housing in the international human rights movement and in international human rights law. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was developed in part with United States leadership, specifically of Eleanor Roosevelt, and adopted by the UN General Assembly in 1948, states, and I quote, that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself, herself, his and her family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care and necessary social services. In 1951, the United Nations General Assembly drafted the two covenants, or treaties, to further develop these rights first articulated in the Universal Declaration. These two covenants are the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. While they are separate as treaties, their interdependence has been repeatedly affirmed in resolutions by the United Nations and other international bodies. The right to adequate housing is most clearly identified in Article 11.1 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and it is further elaborated upon through the guidance of the committee that is responsible for overseeing the covenant's implementation, that is the Committee on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, through the issuance of what are called general comments, specifically general comments 4 and 7, which articulate what is adequate housing, and which also articulate what is illegal forced removals and what protections individuals should have from illegal forced evictions. The United States has signed the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, but it never ratified it. In 1979, under the leadership of President Jimmy Carter, the 39th U.S. president, the U.S. signed the treaty, but for political reasons, the Carter administration did not push for the necessary review and ratification of this covenant by the U.S. Senate. The U.S. Senate must give its advice and consent before the U.S. can ratify any treaty. After Jimmy Carter, the Reagan administration, the first Bush administration, all took the view that economic and social and cultural rights were really not human rights at all, but simply social goals and not the object of binding treaties and laws. That puts the United States at odds with over 160 other nations in the world, the vast majority of the nation's world, of countries, who have all ratified, signed and ratified the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. The Clinton administration that followed did not deny the nature of these rights, but it too lacked the political courage to engage with the U.S. Senate over the covenant. And the previous Bush administration followed the line of his father and the Reagan administration. But because the United States has signed the convention, it still has obligations already. It's not ratified the convention, but according to the law of treaties, a government that has signed but not ratified a treaty must refrain from any acts that would defeat the object and the purpose of the treaty. Arguably, so much of U.S. policy and evictions in the United States and the failure to respond to the crisis of homelessness in the United States itself constitute acts which defeat the object and purpose of the treaty which the U.S. has signed.